En Estados Unidos, la última ofensiva política mediática de Donald Trump ha dejado un rastro de controversias, improvisación y mensajes contradictorios. Lo que debía ser una estrategia para proyectar fuerza desde la Casa Blanca terminó convertida en una demostración de cómo su círculo político y mediático intenta sostener un relato a toda costa, incluso frente a datos que desmienten su posición.
Potentially an all-time White House American record for most number of press that showed up. The press from around the world, the press that covers this, they live in D.C.
En el centro de la polémica estuvo la propuesta de Trump de intervenir directamente en la policía de Washington. Una medida que, más que un plan de seguridad, refleja un intento de concentrar poder federal sobre una ciudad gobernada por autoridades locales demócratas. La idea se vio aún más empañada por un anuncio paralelo, un encuentro con Vladimir Putin en Alaska, acompañado de lapsos verbales en los que Trump se refirió concretamente al Estado como Rusia. La escena no solo generó reacciones de sorpresa, sino que reabrió interrogantes sobre el propósito real de estos gestos y la manera en que se utilizan para moldear la opinión pública. Un recordatorio rápido: si te está gustando este video, no olvides darle a like, suscribirte y comentar, que nos ayuda mucho. Dicho esto, pasamos al video.
Think of a better person on the planet to put in the room with Putin other than Trump. He has a relationship with President Putin, which is a good thing. But the reason Putin is in Alaska is because President Trump announced he was going to sell weapons to Europe to help Ukraine, and that rattled Putin. But he put a 50% tariff, President Trump did, on India for buying Russian oil. He went after the second largest purchaser of Russian oil that keeps the war machine going in Russia, India, with a 50% tariff. That's why Putin's going to Alaska. Peace.
La maquinaria mediática afín al presidente, encabezada por Fox News, intentó presentar la jornada como un éxito. Para ello, recurrieron a detalles superficiales, como el número de periodistas presentes en la sala de prensa, intentando convertir la asistencia en una prueba de respaldo y legitimidad. Paralelamente, figuras republicanas como el senador Lindsey Graham defendieron la idea del encuentro de Putin, apelando a una supuesta relación personal que, según ellos, podrían favorecer a Estados Unidos. Sin embargo, esta situación ignora que la política exterior no puede depender de afinidades individuales, y mucho menos cuando involucra a líderes con intereses abiertamente opuestos.
Having Gavin.
You know what? The people get a vote on this. He doesn't just get to do this. And what he wants to do, after the people voted to change the California Constitution, he wants to go around those people and give himself more power. If he puts this on the ballot, I think the people of California are going to vote against this. You even see the nonpartisan groups that have come out against this.
La estrategia discursiva de los aliados de Trump se centró en dos ejes: atacar a gobernadores y estados demócratas y también acusar a sus propios adversarios de prácticas que ellos mismos han implementado. El caso de gerrymandering, la manipulación partidista de distritos electorales, es ilustrativo. Mientras acusan a California, Illinois o Nueva York de distorsionar la representación, omiten que estados republicanos aplican las mismas tácticas con intensidad similar o mayor. Este doble rasero es fundamental para entender cómo se construye el relato político en estos espacios.
Last thing he wants to hear is that he's a hypocrite, which is exactly what it is. One thing that the Texas redistricting effort has exposed is how all of these large blue states have gerrymandered their states so dramatically. Look at California, look at Illinois, look at Massachusetts, look at New York. They have the worst examples of gerrymandering. Texas is not like.
Los datos sobre la criminalidad en Washington desmontan el argumento de que la capital vive una crisis de seguridad que justifique una intervención federal. Las cifras muestran que la ciudad registra los niveles más bajos de violencia en 3 décadas y que muchos estados con gobiernos republicanos superan ampliamente estos índices. Sin embargo, la estrategia de Trump no parece orientada a resolver problemas reales, sino a imponer control político sobre territorios adversos, utilizando la seguridad como pretexto y desviando la atención de otros frentes críticos, como su gestión económica o las investigaciones judiciales en curso.
It's a constitutional right to protect the people in this district and to make us safe. And until he came along, it was just going along and, oh yeah, maybe got a little better this year, but it's never good enough. It's never peaceful enough. And that's the problem with DC and these apologists who say, oh, we're not as bad as we used to be. Nonsense. It's time for us to get rid of crime and make criminals accountable. And that D.C. Council, those laws that they passed are absurd. They are defense oriented, they are criminal focused, and the criminals.
El despliegue de todo lo que ha sucedido en medios aliados no solo busca reforzar la imagen de liderazgo de Trump, sino que también busca preparar el terreno para medidas excepcionales, como la federalización de cuerpos policiales o el uso de fuerzas armadas en territorios estadounidenses. La normalización de estas ideas, bajo el argumento de supuestamente restablecer el orden, supone un riesgo directo para el equilibrio de poderes y para la autonomía de los gobiernos locales. Más allá del espectáculo mediático, lo que está en juego es la forma en que se define y se ejerce la autoridad en un sistema democrático.
The question of martial law keeps getting raised by the left, that Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth, they want to impose martial law as authoritarians would. Mm-hmm. To that you say?
To that I say, look at Los Angeles. They said the exact same thing. Oh, look, 4,000 troops, California National Guard. Oh, look, the Marines. You can't put in the Marines. What? They were the troops available to ensure that we de-escalated the situation and didn't allow other lawbreakers to say, look, it's wide open. We can do whatever we want in these sanctuary cities. I was told, oh, you're going to lock up political opponents. You're going to go after Democrats, yada, yada. It's the same stuff every time, mischaracterizing our intentions. The intentions of this president is to establish law and order using legal and lawful and constitutional means, which he completely has. And you know what? You know why they don't like him? He's got the guts to do it. He's got the guts to say, I'm going to federalize the police that don't work. I'm going to bring in the National Guard. I'm going to bring in federal marshals. I'm going to bring in the park police.
How long will that be?
Este episodio no es solo una muestra de improvisación política, sino un recordatorio de cómo a veces la manipulación puede convertir datos en verdades percibidas y medidas autoritarias en soluciones supuestamente necesarias. La pregunta clave es si la sociedad estadounidense está dispuesta a cuestionar ese relato antes de que se traduzca en cambios irreversibles en la estructura democrática del país. Pero cuéntanos, ¿qué opinan ustedes sobre este tipo de intervenciones federales en gobiernos locales? ¿Creen que los datos objetivos aún tienen peso frente a la situación política dominante? Si les interesa este tipo de análisis, no olviden suscribirse, darle a like y compartir este video para llegar a más personas. Esto es Rumor de Estado.
En la política estadounidense, los símbolos y gestos son armas tan poderosas como las leyes o los discursos, y pocos políticos han logrado incomodar tanto al presidente Donald Trump como Barack Obama. La relación entre ambos nunca ha sido diplomática, pero en las últimas semanas la tensión ha escalado de forma inusual, hasta el punto de que gestos aparentemente menores están generando un profundo malestar en la Casa Blanca. Hoy analizaremos cómo un movimiento calculado por parte de Obama y una serie de filtraciones internas han dejado al presidente en una posición de vulnerabilidad política. Pero antes de empezar con la noticia, los invito a suscribirte, darle me gusta y comentar su opinión.
Democracy is not self-executing. It requires people, judges, and people in the Justice Department, and people throughout the government who take an oath to uphold the Constitution. It requires them to take that oath seriously. And when that isn't happening, we start drifting into something that is not consistent with American democracy. It is consistent with autocracies. It's consistent with Hungary under Orban. It's consistent with places that hold elections but do not otherwise observe what we think of as a fair system in which everybody's voice matters and people have a seat at the table and there are checks and balances and nobody's above the law.
La salud de una democracia depende de que sus instituciones y funcionarios respeten los límites del poder. Lo que incomoda a Trump es que estas palabras provengan de un expresidente que además sigue gozando de prestigio internacional. Lo que agrava el malestar es que gran parte de las filtraciones recientes son sobre reuniones internas, estrategias políticas y vínculos polémicos, incluyendo las derivadas del caso Epstein. No provienen de adversarios externos, sino de miembros de su propio círculo cercano. Esto revela un clima de desconfianza y posibles fracturas en su equipo, algo que la oposición observa con atención.
And I read pretty much what you read, it would be President Obama. He started it. And Biden was there with him, and Comey was there, and Clapper, the whole group was there. Brennan, they were all there in a room, right here. This was the room. This is much more beautiful than it was then, but that's okay. I have nice pictures up. They came out of the vaults. They were in there for 100 years. This is much more beautiful. We have the Declaration of Independence now in the room, which wasn't here. I guess people didn't feel too good about putting it here, but I do. But you know what? If you look at those papers, they have them stone cold, and it was President Obama. It wasn't lots of people all over the place. It was them too. But the leader of the gang was President Obama.
El fragmento muestra a un presidente más enfocado en confrontar a Obama que en presentar propuestas concretas para los problemas del país. El uso constante del nombre del expresidente como distractor apunta a una estrategia política, la cual es desviar la atención mediática. Sin embargo, la incoherencia del mensaje y la ausencia del contenido sustancial sugieren que este intento no está logrando su objetivo. El desgaste político se profundiza cuando este tipo de declaraciones se combina con decisiones que afectan la imagen institucional de la Casa Blanca. Aquí hay un post el cual se los voy a traducir y dice así: Trump esconde retratos de Obama y Bush en una escalera oscura de la Casa Blanca. La renovación de la Casa Blanca continúa mientras el presidente entierra evidencia de sus predecesores recientes. Aparentemente, Donald Trump no quiere que el público vea recordatorios de sus predecesores inmediatos cuando visiten la Casa Blanca. Los retratos de los expresidentes de Barack Obama, George W. Bush y George H.W. Bush han sido reubicados de una exhibición pública prominente a la parte superior de una escalera a la que pocas personas pueden acceder, informó CNN. Según dos fuentes de CNN familiarizadas con el asunto, Trump ordenó al personal que pusiera el retrato de Obama en la parte superior de la gran escalera que conduce a la residencia de la Casa Blanca, un área a la que solo un pequeño grupo de personal de la Casa Blanca y agentes del servicio secreto pueden acceder. Una de esas fuentes también dijo que ambos retratos de Bush ahora se encuentran en la misma escalera. Esto contradice décadas de precedente en el protocolo de la Casa Blanca, que históricamente ha elogiado los retratos de presidentes recientes y los ha colocado en lugares prominentes visibles para invitados y visitantes. Esta es la segunda vez que Trump reubica el retrato de Obama. La primera vez lo movió de un lado del gran vestíbulo de la Casa Blanca al otro. En su lugar, Trump puso una pintura de sí mismo levantando el puño después del intento de asesinato en Butler, Pensilvania. Ha transformado la oficina oval cubriéndola con toscos detalles de pan de oro para que coincidan con el gusto ostentoso del presidente. En junio, Trump retiró un busto del líder de derechos civiles Martin Luther King Jr. de la oficina oval. También retiró una maceta de hiedra sueca que había estado en la sala durante 50 años. Triplicó la cantidad de pinturas exhibidas en la pared de la oficina oval. Mover los retratos de Obama y de expresidentes republicanos a un lugar de acceso restringido rompe con décadas de tradición y proyecta inseguridad. Esta decisión, junto con otros cambios en la decoración de la Casa Blanca, puede parecer superficial, pero en el contexto político actual tiene una fuente de significado simbólico: la voluntad de borrar referencias históricas que no encajan con su narrativa presidencial. Esto envía un mensaje de intolerancia hacia la pluralidad y una visión reducida de la historia nacional que termina debilitando la legitimidad del propio cargo.
What I can tell you is that the Texas Democrats that are here are welcome. We're providing them a safe haven, a place for them to visit and stay. Breaking quorum because they're heroes that are standing up not just for their own constituents and for the people of Texas and their rights, but also for the rights of people all across the country. Because what Greg Abbott is doing and what Donald Trump is attempting to do is to cheat. Mid-decade here, this is they're attempting to change the map. They know that they're going to lose in 2026, the Congress, and so they're trying to steal seats. And so that is what these Texas Democrats are trying to stand up against. And then don't forget, the map that they put together it violates the Voting Rights Act, and it violates the Constitution. And so thank God for these Texas House Democrats.
Well, let's talk about the issue at hand here. Texas Republicans being urged by President Trump, as you just said, are pushing this mid-decade redistricting plan. Their goal is to add as many as 5 GOP seats in response to Democrats like yourself or thinking of drawing your own maps to boost seats in blue states. Take a listen to what Texas Governor Greg Abbott told my colleague Ryan Chandler about that. Take a look.
What's your message to governors like Newsom, Hochul, Pritzker, who have said they will retaliate if Texas does this?
They have no capability. They've already gerrymandered their states in ways in which they don't have hardly any Republican members of Congress. Look at the map of Illinois. It's drawn in such a way that they can't even squeeze out another Republican. It's a joke.
What's your response to Governor Abbott?
Well, Governor Abbott is the joke. He's the one who is attempting mid-decade here at a time when, frankly, all of us are concerned about the future of democracy. He's literally helping whittle it away and licking the boots of his leader, Donald Trump. Here in Illinois, we followed the law. We provided a map and passed a map that follows the Voting Rights Act and the Constitution and the laws of the state of Illinois. He's attempting to thwart federal law and take away 5 seats that are in the hands of black, brown, minority congresspeople and the people that they represent. He's taking those votes away. He's violating the Constitution. And all of us need to stand up and speak out and make sure that it's understood across the country that what they're trying to do in Texas is illegal.
Well, Governor, it might be illegal. It's not unprecedented, though, or it might be rare, I should say. But Texas actually tried to redraw districts mid-decade before in 2003, and the U.S. Supreme Court actually upheld the map in that case with the exception of one district. So the argument that Abbott is making is it's not illegal, though they are doing it certainly in an off year. But I do want to look at the map of Illinois. Let's take a look at this. Despite President Trump winning 44% of the statewide vote in 2024, Republicans hold only 3 of Illinois' 17 districts. These districts seem to be designed to maximize Democratic advantage. What do you say to those who argue that it's hypocritical for you to criticize Texas for partisanship when your state also drew maps to boost your party's standing?
Well, remember that what Texas is trying to do is, again, violate the Voting Rights Act. We didn't. We held public hearings, legislative hearings. People attended them. They spoke out. There was a map that was put out. There were actually changes made to the map. And a map was passed. And it was done at the end of the census, the decennial census. So that's how it's done in this country.
El contraste entre la actitud de algunos líderes demócratas y la estrategia de confrontación de Trump es evidente. En este caso, el respaldo ofrecido al legislador que enfrentan intentos de manipulación electoral en Texas refleja una concepción de la política como defensa activa de los derechos y de la legalidad. Frente a ello, el intento de los republicanos texanos, respaldado por la Casa Blanca, de redibujar distritos a mitad de ciclo electoral, responde a un cálculo partidista que podría vulnerar la Ley de Derechos Electorales y la Constitución. Esta diferencia no es solo de forma, sino de fondo. Habla de la disposición a usar el poder para incluir o para excluir. La defensa de la integridad electoral y de las instituciones exige coherencia incluso cuando el adversario político adopta tácticas de presión. La imagen de dureza que algunos republicanos intentan proyectar contrasta con la realidad de decisiones motivadas por el temor de perder el poder. Y mientras esa contradicción persista, será difícil sostener una narrativa de liderazgo fuerte. El desafío para la oposición será mantener esta presión política sin caer en la misma dinámica de confrontación vacía. Antes de cerrar, me gustaría saber su opinión. ¿Crees que la estrategia de Trump de invisibilizar a sus predecesores puede tener algún impacto político o no? Por último, si este análisis les ha resultado útil, les invito a suscribirse, dejar su me gusta, comentar la opinión del video y por supuesto compartir este video para que más personas puedan reflexionar sobre estos temas. Nos vemos en el próximo Rumor de Estado.
Tal parece que la última comparecencia de Donald Trump en la Casa Blanca no fue simplemente un acto fallido de comunicación. Fue un despliegue preocupante de desinformación, contradicciones y hasta señales de alineamiento con intereses extranjeros. Lo que debía ser un anuncio sobre seguridad en Washington terminó siendo un monólogo errático que mezcló falsedades, ataques personales y declaraciones inquietantes sobre la soberanía estadounidense.
This is a tragic emergency. And it's embarrassing for me to be up here. You know, I'm going to see Putin. I'm going to Russia on Friday. I don't like being up here talking about how unsafe and how dirty and disgusting this once beautiful capital was, with graffiti all over the walls. It's another part of
Trump justificó el envío de la Guardia Nacional a la capital alegando un supuesto aumento de la criminalidad. Sin embargo, las cifras oficiales muestran lo contrario. Los delitos violentos han disminuido. Lo alarmante aquí es que en medio de ese discurso afirmó que se reuniría con Vladimir Putin en Rusia, refiriéndose a Alaska como si fuera un territorio ruso. Esta narrativa, más allá del error geográfico, coincide con la propaganda histórica del Kremlin que insiste en reclamar Alaska por parte de su patrimonio.
To Russia, that's going to be a big deal. What happens, happens. I'll let you know what happens. You'll be the first to know. I'll be calling the European leaders. I'm going with totally, I mean, we have a lot of talks. They're great people. They're great leaders, actually, and they want to get back. Honestly, as one of them said, I've OD'd on trying to settle Ukraine. They've OD'd, meaning they've overdosed on the settlement of Ukraine. Not a nice expression, but boy, is it accurate. They're tired of it. They want to get back to spending money on their countries. You know, Biden gave them $350 billion. Europe gave $100 billion. It should be much more than that. Shouldn't have been that kind of, they should have had equalization, but they didn't. But you know what? Still a lot of money. They want to get back to building their own countries. They really want it resolved. My relationship with the European leaders, as you saw, is extremely good. It's perfect. It's beautiful. Wait. And we're going to try. I'll be in touch with them. I have 5 of them call me. You think it's easy? There are a lot of European leaders, but they rely on me. Very much rely on me. If it wasn't for me, this thing would never get solved until the last person breathing is dead.
Would you talk to them before?
Mr. President. Yeah, I did. I'm talking to them right now. So I'm talking to the European leaders. I'll be talking to President Zelensky. I'm going to get everybody's ideas. I go into that thing fully loaded right up there, and we're going to see what happens. Now, I think one of 2 things is going to happen. It's going to be a good meeting, and we'll go a step further. We'll get it done. I'd like to see a ceasefire very, very quickly. Very quick. I'd like to see it immediately, but I'd like to see it very quickly. And we're going to be dealing with the European leaders, and we're going to be dealing with President Zelensky, and hopefully we're going to have a great success. As far as this, what we did today, and I think you were here for D.C. more so than even Russia, because Russia will be, you know, we have a couple of days to go, but the Russia is going to be very interesting. But to me, what is very exciting, and we're going to take back our capital. We're going to make it beautiful again, but we're going to make it, more importantly, safe again. It's going to be so safe. It's going to be a model.
Esto no fue un lapsus aislado. Trump reiteró varias veces que irá a Rusia para encontrarse con Putin, dejando entrever una visión en la que la integridad territorial de Estados Unidos parece negociable. A esto se sumaron comentarios críticos hacia el presidente ucraniano Volodymyr Zelensky, reprochándole que respete su constitución y se niegue a ceder territorio a Moscú. La implicación es clara. Para Trump, la solución al conflicto pasará por aceptar un reparto territorial dictado por Rusia. En la intervención, Trump atacó a líderes políticos como Gavin Newsom, recorriendo a insultos personales. También dedicó abiertamente la construcción de vivienda de interés social, describiéndola como una amenaza para zonas hermosas del país. El patrón es consistente. Desprecio a comunidades de ingresos bajos o medios y preferencia por políticas que benefician a sectores privilegiados. Hasta incluso habló de eliminar los barrios marginales, con un tono más cercano a una operación militar que a un plan de desarrollo urbano. La conferencia derivó en una serie de digresiones, desde remodelaciones ostentosas en la Casa Blanca hasta referencias inconexas sobre incendios en California, estatuas confederadas y supuestas limpiezas urbanas en otros países. La ausencia de coherencia refuerza la percepción de un liderazgo que prioriza la autopromoción y la confrontación sobre la gestión real de los problemas. Lo más grave es que el despliegue militar en Washington presenta como una respuesta a una emergencia coincidiendo con un momento de dificultades políticas y económicas para Trump. La medida, amparada en disposiciones legales específicas, podría interpretarse como un ensayo de control federal directo sobre fuerzas locales, algo con implicaciones preocupantes para la autonomía de los gobiernos municipales y estatales. Ante este escenario queda claro que más que fortalecer la seguridad, Trump utiliza el poder presidencial para proyectar la fuerza, desviar la atención de sus fracasos y hasta normalizar situaciones favorables a intereses ajenos a la nación. Pero cuéntame, ¿qué opinan ustedes sobre la forma en que Trump maneja la seguridad y las relaciones internacionales? ¿Creen que este tipo de mensajes ponen en riesgo la soberanía de Estados Unidos? Si este análisis te resultó útil, no olvides suscribirte, dejar tu like y compartir este contenido para seguir desentrañando la política y la actualidad de Estados Unidos. Esto es Rumor de Estado. Las declaraciones recientes de Donald Trump emitidas durante un evento cultural de alto perfil han reabierto el debate sobre el uso del espectáculo como una herramienta política. Más allá de los aplausos y la cobertura mediática, lo dicho y hasta lo omitido refleja un patrón estratégico que combina proyección de poder, mensajes implícitos hacia aliados internacionales y una opción que busca moldear la percepción de las personas de manera pública.
And we'll make it better than it ever was, frankly. It'll be something that people are going to be very proud of. Along with, in the bigger picture, a place called Washington, D.C. That is the bigger one, and we'll talk about that in a little while. But let's talk about right now the Kennedy Center, and I'm delighted to be here as we officially announce the incredibly talented artists who will be celebrated later this year at the 2025 Kennedy Center Honors. It's going to be a big evening. I've been asked to host. I said, I'm the President of the United States. Are you fools asking me to do that? Sir, you'll get much higher ratings. I said, I don't care. I'm President of the United States. I won't do it. They said, please. And then Susie Wells said to me, sir, I'd like you to host. I said, okay, Susie, I'll do it. That's the power she's got. But I just, so I have agreed to host. Do you believe what I have to do? And I didn't want to do it, okay? They're going to say, he insisted. I did not insist. But I think it will be quite successful, actually. It's been a long time. I used to host the Apprentice finales, and we did rather well with that. So I think we're going to do very well because we have some great honorees, some really great ones. Since 1978, the Kennedy Center Honors have been among the most prestigious awards in the performing arts. I wanted one. I was never able to get one. This year, it's true, actually. I would have taken it if they would have called me. I waited and waited and waited, and I said, the hell with it. I'll become chairman, and I'll give myself an honor. Maybe I'm going to honor, next year we'll honor Trump, okay? This year, the board has selected a truly exceptional class of honorees. I mean, really exceptional. First is country music star, actor, and producer George Strait. Great. Over an extraordinary 4-decade career, George has sold more than 120 million records worldwide, amassed 60 #1 hits, wow, and produced 33 platinum certified albums, more than any other living American. That is amazing. He's believed by millions of people to just be as good as you can get, and he's beloved by hundreds of millions of people all over the world. He's really something, and they call him the king of country, and we know him very well, George Strait. Okay, please. Oh, it looks nice. You're a good-looking guy. I hope he still looks like that. Second is actor, singer, philanthropist, and star of the Broadway stage. One of my favorite talents. I think he's one of the greatest talents I've ever actually seen. I've always said, and just so we don't get in trouble, I'll say among the greatest artists in the world are the Broadway London actors back and forth. That's all they want to do is they want to do Broadway and they want to do London. They want to do 8 shows a week, including matinee on Wednesday. And if you said make a movie, they can't even think about it. If you say go on television, they don't want to. All they want to do is be on the stage, the live stage, and it's amazing. But I've always said they're the most talented people. And this man may be the most of all. Michael Crawford is being honored. Michael was born in England in 1942. He made his Broadway debut in 19
67. I was there. I shouldn't say that, but I was there. Seems like a long time ago. And he became an international sensation in the 1980s for his original portrayal of the Phantom of the Opera, one of the greatest ever, 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 ever. You don't see him like that very often. Winning him the esteemed Tony Award for Best Actor in a Musical. He's won so many awards. Michael is truly a generational talent, had a voice that was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. There's never, I don't know, it's, Luciano Pavarotti had a very different voice. The power was incredible, magnificent. Michael had a different kind of a voice. These are just unbelievable talents. But Michael is very special and one of the greatest roles in the history of Broadway. And nobody did it like him. Michael Crawford, thank you very much. Great guy. Next, we look forward to honoring three-time Oscar nominee, Golden Globe Award winner, an action movie icon, and a friend of mine. He's a very unique man. He's somebody that doesn't do these things. I said, I wonder if he'll accept, because some people don't really want to be honored. They don't care. But he was very honored to be honored, I will tell you. He's a very special guy. A real talent, never been given the credit for the talent. There was nobody else could have done the roles that he did like he did. I'm not even close, and they've tried, and they didn't work out too well. His name is Sylvester Stallone. So it's very few, almost, if any, people that could have taken a name and made it so incredible, like Rocky, Rambo, Creed, and others. But think of it, Rocky, Rambo, if you did one, you're good. You do two. And I'll never forget, I was a young guy, and I went to see a thing called Rambo, and it had just come out. I didn't know anything about it, but I was in a movie theater, like we used to go to movie theaters a lot. And I said, this movie is phenomenal. What the heck? And that turned out to be a monster. Rocky is Rocky. I mean, the way that happened, you know, Sly had no money, nothing, and he went around, and everybody wants to do a boxing movie. It's the most, you know, probably more than any other type of character, boxing, always boxing. It's so great. And there's rarely been anything like this one. John Voight did a great one, as you know. Champ, great. I think that was right there, too. John Voight's a phenomenal person, phenomenal actor. But Sly came in and he had no money. He wrote a script along with thousands of other people writing scripts on a boxer. And for some reason, a studio picked up this and liked it. And Sly he's in an old car that he came in from Brooklyn or someplace in New York, but I think Brooklyn. It barely made it to California. He was sleeping in the car. I mean, he had nothing. And he wanted control over who the actor was going to be, because he said it can't be successful if you're going to pick a movie actor with a bad build, okay? A nice face, but a bad body. And he said, I can't have these guys, because he's a tough cookie, and he knew exactly what it took. He knew what a boxer's body was. So they brought him one, and I won't tell you who it was, but it was a big name, but the chest wasn't exactly what you need. One shot, and your heart would pop out. That wasn't too good. Then he did another one. He was fat, sloppy, but had a good face. Then he did another one, and another one, and another one. And he turned it down. He wouldn't take $1 million. He wouldn't do it. And it turned out that when they saw him, they said, you know, you'd be actually pretty good for this role. And he had never done this before, anything like it. But think of it, he turned down $1 million. He had nothing. He refused to let somebody else play. He didn't want to play it. He wasn't original. He did it as a writer. But he ended up playing it because he couldn't find anybody else that fit the role. And who knew what would have happened? He's become a legend of the silver screen, a true legend, and he's a great guy. He's a little bit tough, a little bit different, I will tell you. He's a little tough guy. But he's a phenomenal person with a phenomenal wife and family. Incredible wife, incredible family. His films grossing more than $7.5 billion, which is either a record or very close to it. I can't imagine anybody doing more. If you add up Rambo and Rocky and these others, I can't imagine anybody doing much more. $7.5 billion worldwide over the course of 6 decades. And Sly is a pillar of the really American pop culture and a Hollywood superstar like few others, and one of the biggest names on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. In fact, the only one that's a bigger name on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, they say, is a guy named Donald Trump. I'm on the Hollywood Walk of Fame too, if you can believe that one. But he's amazing. He's really amazing, and he's actually a great actor. Fourth will be together celebrating one of the most revered singers of the American disco era, Gloria Gaynor. Best known for her chart-topping 1978 hit, I Will Survive. Gloria won the 1980 Grammy for Best Disco Recording, and her song was inducted into the National Recording Registry in 2016. 4 decades later, Gloria won a second Grammy in 2020 for her gospel album, Testimony, which is incredible. Truly a historic achievement, not only in terms of the years that have gone by to be great that long, but to have the two top of anything in that span of time, and with that kind of period between, is pretty amazing. But I will say that I Will Survive is an unbelievable song. I've heard it, like everyone else here, thousands of times. And it's one of those few that get better every time you hear it. And nobody can sing it like her. And that's an honor. So, Gloria Gaynor, thank you. Thank you very much. And finally, we'll be honoring one of the greatest rock bands of all time, Kiss. So Kiss was formed in 1973 in New York City by founding band members, and incredible people, by the way, Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, Ace Frehley, and Peter Criss. Kiss became a global phenomenon, sold more than 100 million records worldwide, and produced 30 gold albums and lots of other things they produced. They made a fortune. And they're great people, and they deserve it, and they work hard, and they're still working hard, and it's an honor to present Kiss. Thank you very much. Got it? Yeah. Thank you. And they're going to do something very special. Kiss is going to be here on a little bit before the show. I think they're going to do something very special. We're going to have a good time. The 48th Kennedy Center honorees are outstanding people, a standing group, incredible. We can't wait to celebrate the Kennedy Center honors. It'll be in December, it'll be on CBS.
El riesgo de esta estrategia es doble. Por un lado, se alimenta la situación que presenta cualquier crítica como una reacción exagerada de los adversarios políticos o mediáticos. Por otro lado, se envían señales ambiguas a actores internacionales, especialmente cuando se trata de países con los que la relación es compleja. Si bien era parte de la audiencia, estas declaraciones refuerzan la imagen de un líder directo y auténtico. En plano institucional, incrementa la incertidumbre sobre la posición real del país en temas estratégicos. Pero cuéntanos, ¿creen ustedes que este tipo de declaraciones informales afectan la política exterior de Estados Unidos? ¿Piensan que mezclar entretenimiento y diplomacia fortalece o debilita la imagen del país? Si valoran este análisis, no olviden suscribirse, dejar su like y compartir este video para que más personas comprendan las implicaciones de la política detrás de estos gestos. Las últimas conferencias de prensa desde la Casa Blanca han expuesto un patrón muy inquietante: evasión de preguntas críticas, contradicciones públicas y hasta un mensaje oficial centrado en reforzar la lealtad al presidente más que ofrecer información verificable. Los eventos recientes involucran desde declaraciones confusas sobre política exterior hasta propuestas económicas que apuntan a limitar la transparencia de datos claves para el país.
Yesterday twice that he was planning to go to Russia. Was that a verbal slip up, or does he actually plan to go to Russia?
Perhaps there are plans in the future to travel to Russia, and on Friday the president will be meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska, as you know.
Durante la primera conferencia, la portavoz Karoline Leavitt fue cuestionada por un error reiterado del presidente: referirse a Alaska como Rusia y afirmar que viajaría allá. La respuesta no aclaró si se trata de un lapsus o una confusión, sino que dejó abierta la posibilidad de un viaje a futuro a territorio ruso, intentando presentar la situación como parte de la agenda presidencial.
The president was diagnosed with chronic venous insufficiency after his legs were seen swelling. How's he being treated for that? And while you were upfront about those health issues, curious if the White House would be willing to let us speak with his physician directly about those health issues. I know there were a lot of concerns about the last White House not making the physician available. Would the physician be available in this case?
I don't want to make that commitment on behalf of the physician, but it's certainly something we can look into and explore out of the effort of transparency, because unlike the previous White House, there is nothing to hide. You guys see this president working around the clock, literally 24/7, all of the time, and I will be happy to look into that request.
Can we at least get an update on how he's being treated for the swelling legs and for the hands and the other issues?
Look, you see the president every day. He's moving, he's working, he's continuing. There have been no adjustments made to his lifestyle.
La misma sesión incluyó preguntas sobre el estado de salud del presidente, luego de que la Casa Blanca reconociera un diagnóstico de insuficiencia venosa crónica. El acceso a su equipo médico no fue confirmado, apelando a una supuesta transparencia que quedó sin garantías concretas. Un aviso rápido: si te está gustando este video, no olvides suscribirte, darle like, comentar, que nos ayuda bastante. Dicho esto, pasamos a video.
Ignore the panicans and trust in President Trump. That is our motto here at the White House. The America First economic agenda is working.
Más allá de los temas de salud, Leavitt repitió un mensaje central: confíen en el presidente, un eslogan que busca reforzar el apoyo incondicional y desplazar el debate público hacia la lealtad personal más que a la evaluación de resultados.
Agents detained a 15-year-old student with disabilities outside an LA high school, even leaving bullets on the sidewalk. How does the Trump administration plan to ensure parents that their children can return to school without fear of being wrongfully detained or endangered by federal agents?
Where'd you see that report?
LA Times.
Okay, well, I'll have to look into the veracity of that report. I read the LA Times almost every single day, and they are notorious for misleading the public. I'm sure there's more to that story than the way that you just characterized it. This administration wants to ensure that all school children across the country in every city from Los Angeles to DC can go to school safely. And that's part of this administration's effort to federalize the National Guard in Washington, to ensure that ICE is removing child predators. I just read you a list of a handful, just a handful, of the hundreds of thousands of child predators that this administration is removing off of the streets of Los Angeles and every other community across this country, because we want to ensure this is a country where American school children can be safe, where they can prosper, and where they are not threatened by violent criminals, whether they are illegal or whether they are American citizen homegrown criminals, as this president calls them. So I will gladly go check on that report, and I'll get you the facts. Thank you.
Este enfoque se replicó en temas económicos. La portavoz fue consultada por declaraciones del nuevo nominado a dirigir la Oficina de Estadísticas Laborales, quien planteó suspender los informes mensuales de empleo y publicar datos solo de forma trimestral. La justificación oficial se centró en corregir la metodología antes de continuar, lo que en la práctica significaría reducir la frecuencia de datos claves en medio de indicadores negativos. En otro momento, Leavitt respondió a un reportaje sobre la detención de un estudiante con discapacidad por parte de ICE en Los Ángeles, descalificando la fuente como notoriamente engañosa. Aunque afirmó leerlo casi a diario, evitó confirmar la información y defendió las políticas de seguridad como parte de un plan para proteger supuestamente a la niñez, mientras se refuerza la presencia federal de distintas ciudades.
On the economy. So first, we've had small businesses tell us that it's not foreign exporters who are eating the tariffs. It's them. And they've held off on raising prices, but soon they're going to have to raise prices. What is the White House's message to them?
The White House's message to our small business owners across the country is you have never had a better ally or friend or supporter in this White House than President Donald Trump, who is a businessman himself, who understands your concerns and who wants to restore wealth back to our country through the powerful use of tariffs. And that's what he's focused on doing while simultaneously driving down costs. You have to remember, we are 6 months into this administration and we had a president who had no business experience, had no idea what he was doing, and who funneled billions of wasteful spending dollars into our economy, which created the worst inflation crisis in a generation. Now this president is focused on tackling inflation, deregulating, cutting costs, cutting red tape to make it easier for small business owners to thrive. And again, the economic indicators show.
Cuando el tema regresó a la economía, las preocupaciones de pequeñas empresas por el impacto de los aranceles fue respondido con mensaje político. Trump es el mayor aliado de los negocios y las dificultades actuales serían con un mensaje político. Abro cita. Trump sería el mayor aliado de los negocios y las dificultades actuales serían responsabilidad de la administración anterior. No hubo reconocimiento de que los propios aranceles estuvieran elevando costos. Cierro cita. Finalmente, un hecho insólito. El presidente insinuó demandar a su propio presidente de la reforma federal, Jerome Powell, por incompetencia. La portavoz se limitó a confirmar que esa era la posición de Trump, sin detallar fundamentos ni procesos legales. Pero cuéntanos, ¿tú qué crees? ¿Consideran que reducir el acceso a información médica y económica fortalece la gestión presidencial o la debilita? ¿Creen que esta estrategia de comunicación es sostenible a largo plazo en un contexto de creciente escrutinio? Si valoran este análisis, los invitamos a suscribirse, dejar su like y compartir este contenido para que más personas puedan conocer los hechos detrás del discurso oficial. Esto es Rumor de Estado.
En la arena de la política mediática estadounidense, no es raro que los programas de debate se conviertan en escenarios de confrontación. Sin embargo, lo que a menudo se presenta como un intercambio de ideas es, en realidad, un reflejo de la precaria base argumental que sostiene a ciertos discursos. Hoy analizaremos dos ejemplos contundentes de esta dinámica, en los que figuras conservadoras se vieron incapaces de sostener un debate frente a un análisis factual y contextual. En un primer momento, veremos al representante de Texas, James Talerico, desmantelar la retórica de un presentador de Fox News que intentaba justificar la manipulación electoral. Pero antes, te invitamos a suscribirte, darle me gusta y comentar tu opinión sobre este video. Vamos con la noticia.
You know, you've racked up fines. I assume you're in a hotel room. I'm not sure where you are in Illinois. You know, you've got different costs racking up, including travel. How is that all being paid for?
Yeah, we brought our own Texas flag, brought my cowboy boots, so we've got a little bit of home here in Illinois. And I wish desperately that I was back in Texas with my family, with my friends, with my constituents, even with my Republican colleagues. You know, I wish they weren't trying to rig the next election with these new maps in the middle of the decade, but unfortunately they've decided to go through with this. And so we're using this legitimate constitutional tactic to stop that power grab and fight for our constituents.
Representative, let me just jump in because of the language. Just because of the language, I would love to jump in. You said rig the election. So let's just take a moment now and make sure that we're all on the same page when we choose the words that we use, just for the accuracy and edification of the audience. Did the state of Illinois rig their election when they drew their map the way they did as Sodrone, or the state of New York, or the state of Massachusetts, or the state of California? Would you describe those states as rigged elections as well?
I'm not an elected official in those states, but I've condemned those maps. I'm against gerrymandering wherever it happens. If it happens in a red state or in a blue state, it's wrong. But what's happening here is they're redistricting in the middle of the decade. So they already gerrymandered our maps in 2021. I was there. I spoke against the bill. I didn't break quorum. My colleagues and I didn't break quorum. We're breaking quorum now because they are trying to change the rules halfway through the game, and they're doing it at the request of the most powerful man in the country.
The President of the United States. No, we're going to go back to the funding. Right. I don't want you or the audience to forget that that's where we are. But just because you've used the word rigging, I appreciate that you condemned those maps, that you're against gerrymandering wherever it may be. But to be clear then, I'm hearing you think those states are rigged. The elections coming out of Illinois and Massachusetts and New York, those are rigged elections as well. You condemn those. But you differentiate Texas. I think you just said that exactly. You said, I condemn those, called Texas rigged. They're similar in that way. So I would assume that means you think they're rigged. The only difference you drew was when? Middle of the decade, middle census. Well, Gavin Newsom says he's about to do that in California, and Kathy Hochul says she's about to do that in New York. So they are guilty in your mind, clearly, of rigging elections, clearly in California and New York.
Both of those efforts in those blue states are contingent on if Texas decides to cheat, if Texas Republicans decide to draw these maps in the middle of the decade at the request of the most powerful man in the country.
So
Again,
you rigged in response to something you call rigging. You cheat in response to something you think is cheating.
I'm trying to listen to you, and I'd love for you to try to give me a chance to speak. You know, I think that all of us should be alarmed, whether we're Democrats, independents, or Republicans, if the most powerful politician in the country, whether it's President Trump or President Obama, if they are trying to change the rules midway through the decade so they don't have to face accountability for their actions. What I would ask you is, if Republican policies are so popular, why do they have to redraw the maps before the election?
Well, my answer to that would be a reflection of political popularity is the number of offices you win and the majority that you enjoy. And right now, Representative, you are a distinct minority in the state of Texas. Your points of view are extremely in the minority. And that is a privilege of the majority. You know, you talk about the president, and the left loves to lay everything at the president's feet because he's become your boogeyman. But this has been driven by the Texas representation in the state legislature. This has been driven by the governor of the state of Texas. Again, a Republican who holds the majority and represents the majority opinion. You've done something that you say is constitutional, which I would suggest is pretty radical, leaving your office, abandoning your office, in defense of a minority point of view that has been done in several of these other states where your party has the majority. It's a little bit like taking your basketball and going home when you don't like the way it's played, but when you're winning in Illinois, you're happy to play by these rules.
Again, I've condemned all gerrymandering across the country. And in fact, when Democrats had a majority in Congress, they voted to ban gerrymandering in every state, red states and blue states. Do you know how many Republican members of Congress joined them in that effort?
Which one? I'm sorry, which state did you just refer to?
I'm asking, do you know how many Republicans joined Democrats in the U.S. Congress to ban gerrymandering? All the Democrats voted for it. 0 Republicans voted for it. 0.
It's an odd.
So you can spare me the both sides rhetoric. It's clearly one side that is trying to rig the rules in the middle of the game. This is like 2 football teams coming out of the locker room at halftime, and the team that's ahead says they want to change the rules for the second half so they can win the game. All of us would be throwing food at the TV if that happened. We don't accept cheating in our politics. We don't accept cheating in our relationships. We shouldn't accept cheating in our elections.
I appreciate whatever you just referred to about the number of Democrat congressmen that I'm unfamiliar with who made this against Republican congressmen who opposed it. It just kind of flies in the face of reality when I look at the state of Massachusetts, where Donald Trump gets 35% of the votes, and there are 0 Republican representatives from the state of Massachusetts.
And who signed that map in Massachusetts?
And so what I'm curious about is words say one thing and actions do something else in a place like Massachusetts. So you can't refer to random words and actions to me when I see the evidence in these states. Look,
well, you just referred
in my
to
view,
Massachusetts.
Representative, you gave the ball game analogy. In my view, what has happened here is you've done something in certain states, and you don't like it when it's done in Republican states. And now you're saying you've done the same thing as us. You've done the same thing as us, and we are going to, by the way, if you do it, we're going to ratchet it up even more, in the words of Gavin Newsom.
My party has never gerrymandered in the middle of the decade at the request of the President of the United States, nor would we. The only way this is going to happen in blue states is if Texas executes this power grab. You mentioned Massachusetts. Do you know the party of the governor that signed that map into law? He was a Republican. It was a Republican governor that signed that map into law. So I just want to be clear with our facts, and I don't want to muddy the waters. All of us, whether we're Democrats, independents, or Republicans, we should stand up to politicians who don't want to face accountability at the ballot box. That's exactly what's happening here. And I asked you, if Republican policies are popular, why do they need to redraw these maps? Why can't they just run on their policies?
I'm getting wrapped on time. I'm enjoying this conversation. I want to let it go on, and I apologize.
El debate en el video no es una simple disputa partidista, es el choque entre la lógica y la evasión. El presentador de Fox News intentó desviar la conversación de la redistribución electoral en Texas, una acción controvertida al acusar de manera generalizada a otros estados gobernados por demócratas. El representante Talerico, sin embargo, se mantuvo firme en su punto, la particularidad de lo que estaba sucediendo en Texas al recordar la historia reciente del gerrymandering y la propuesta de un cambio de reglas a mitad del ciclo electoral. Talerico puso de manifiesto que el verdadero problema no era la práctica en sí mismo, sino su implementación estratégica para consolidar el poder. Su pregunta, ¿por qué necesitan redibujar los mapas si sus políticas son tan populares?, fue un dardo directo a la justificación misma del gerrymandering. Esto obligó al presentador a terminar la entrevista abruptamente, evidenciando que su argumento, basado en la equivalencia superficial y la indignación, no podía resistir a un escrutinio profundo y bien fundamentado.
You said on Fox that you would, if they sent you in, you'd be happy to jump out of a truck and go apprehend people. So if you show up at the door of someone's home as an ICE agent, which you're an ICE agent now, do you know what rights they have?
I'm not an ICE agent yet.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so you are an untrained former actor. You are an untrained former actor.
I am a former actor. I'm a former professional football player too. So when I run down my resume, I mean, so it's stupid.
I'm just telling a fact.
Yeah, you're an untrained actor. You denigrate it as though it's something negative. You denigrate it like it's something negative. Like you know what you're saying. So quit trying to gloss over it. It's ridiculous. It was snarky and it was stupid.
I'm telling you what's negative because you don't know the job. You don't know the job. That's why it's negative. It's nothing.
You don't know that I don't know the job. You're just assuming. Did you know I was a law enforcement officer?
I just asked you, do you know what migrants' rights are? If you show up to someone's house as an ICE agent, do you know what rights they have? Do you know?
They have all the due process rights of anybody in this country.
Okay. So do you need a warrant signed by a judge to apprehend somebody?
This is ridiculous. I'm not a sworn ICE agent yet.
Well, you were saying you were happy to jump out of vans and start apprehending people. You were bragging about that.
I will. And then you made it, of course. And I would if that's what the director asked me to do.
They're being doxxed left, right, and centre on social media and having their lives threatened.
No,
of course they are.
No. This is bullshit. This is bullshit. For starters, we have evidence ICE agents aren't being trained. It is. Really quick. Let's go back to George Redis. He arrived at work. He was a U.S. citizen. ICE agents surrounded his car. He identified himself as a U.S. citizen. They broke his window, pepper sprayed him, and dragged him out. He's in detention for 3 days. So we do have evidence that they're not being trained to respect people's rights. And on the masks, this is crazy. Do you know how many judges have been threatened? You know, if you're a judge and you have, there's a case that is happening, you're a prosecutor, and you're targeting a murder suspect, these guys have been threatened. There have been judges whose families have been threatened. Their lives have been threatened. There are a lot of people in public life who have been threatened. You still don't get to wear a mask and be a secret judge. Not in a free country. You don't. I'm sure you get threatened. I'm sorry. If you're an agent of the government, if you're a representative of the people, you need to show your face and name yourself.
La segunda confrontación entre el actor Dean Cain y Tim Miller es otro ejemplo de esta fragilidad argumental. Aquí, la falta de conocimiento fáctico y legal queda expuesta sin tapujos. Cain, que aspiraba a un rol de agente de inmigración, se vio confrontado con preguntas básicas sobre los derechos de los migrantes y el procedimiento legal. En lugar de responder con información precisa, su reacción fue indignación personal y defensiva, atacando a Miller por su tono en lugar de abordar el fondo del asunto. Este tipo de respuestas revelan una preocupante falta de preparación y un enfoque en la retórica de la indignación por encima de la competencia. El incidente es un claro ejemplo de cómo figuras mediáticas sin una base de conocimientos sólidas son promocionadas como expertos y cómo su credibilidad se basa más en su capacidad para actuar indignados que en su entendimiento real de los temas que defienden. Ambos incidentes subrayan un patrón recurrente en ciertos medios de comunicación: la sustitución del análisis riguroso por la indignación y la evasión. Cuando la narrativa simplista choca contra la realidad, el resultado es la abrupta interrupción del debate, demostrando que no se busca la verdad, sino la validación de una postura ideológica predeterminada. Ahora yo les hago una pregunta a ustedes. ¿Consideran que este tipo de debates que terminan sin una conclusión clara fuerzan la polarización en el espectro político? ¿Hasta qué punto es ético que los presentadores utilicen la indignación como un arma cuando sus argumentos son insuficientes? Por último, si este análisis les ha resultado útil o les gustó, los invito a suscribirse, dejar su me gusta, comentar su opinión y compartir este video para que más personas puedan reflexionar sobre estos temas. Nos vemos en el próximo Rumor de Estado.
La política en Estados Unidos atraviesa un momento en el que las reglas del juego parecen modificarse a voluntad de quienes ostentan el poder. En este escenario, algunos gobernadores demócratas han comenzado a adoptar estrategias más agresivas para contrarrestar lo que consideran intentos de manipular el sistema electoral. Entre ellos, El gobernador de California, Gavin Newsom, ha dado un paso al frente, no solo proponiendo medidas concretas contra las maniobras republicanas de redistribución de distritos, sino también utilizando la comunicación pública y las redes sociales como herramienta de presión política. Un recordatorio súper rápido: si te está gustando este video, no olvides suscribirte, darle like y comentar, que nos ayuda demasiado. Dicho esto, pasamos al video.
With our state of mind, with the clarity of our purpose and conviction, to recognize that we need to reconcile the world we're living in. We do have agency. We're not bystanders in this world. We can shape the future, and that's what we intend to do today. We're here because Donald Trump, on January 6th, tried to light democracy on fire, tried to wreck this country, tried to steal an election, as Alex just said, by trying to dial in for 11, almost 12,000 votes. And here we are, in open and plain sight, before one vote is cast in the 2026 midterm election. And here he is once again trying to rig the system. He doesn't play by a different set of rules. He doesn't believe in the rules. And as a consequence, we need to disabuse ourselves of the way things have been done. It's not good enough to just hold hands, have a candlelight vigil, and talk about the way the world should be. We have got to recognize the cards that have been dealt. And we have got to meet fire with fire. And we've got to be held to a higher level of accountability. So that's what this is about. It's not complicated. We're doing this in reaction to a president of the United States that called a sitting governor of the state of Texas and said, "Find me 5 seats." We're doing it in reaction to that act.
El mensaje de Newsom no es únicamente una denuncia, es una declaración de intenciones. Su planteamiento rompe con la estrategia demócrata tradicional de esperar a que las instituciones corrijan las irregularidades por sí solas. Lo que propone es actuar de inmediato, anticiparse y utilizar todos los recursos legales y políticos disponibles para impedir que se consoliden mapas electorales que podrían alterar el equilibrio de poder en el Congreso. En otras palabras, plantea que la defensa de la democracia requiere una respuesta proporcional al nivel de la amenaza. Solamente mira esto a continuación.
Doing this in reaction to a president of the United States that called a sitting governor of the state of Texas and said, "Find me 5 seats." We're doing it in reaction to that act. We're doing it mindful of our higher angels and better angels. We're doing it mindful that we want to model better behavior, as we've been doing for 15 years in the state of California with our independent redistricting commission. But we cannot unilaterally disarm. We can't stand back and watch this democracy disappear. We can't stand back and watch this democracy disappear district by district all across this country, not just in Texas, but in Missouri, where J.D. Vance went just a week ago, in Indiana, in places like Ohio, in places like Florida. We need to stand up, not just California. Other blue states need to stand up. We need to be firm in our resolve.
Esta declaración es clave porque introduce un debate profundo dentro del Partido Demócrata. ¿Es suficiente mantener estándares éticos más altos o es necesario adaptarse a la realidad política actual para no ceder terreno? Newsom parece inclinarse por la segunda opción, enviando un mensaje directo a otros gobernadores demócratas para que adopten medidas similares en sus estados. Su objetivo no es solo proteger el voto en California, sino crear un bloque de estados que contrarreste las maniobras republicanas a nivel nacional.
Newsom is in on the act now, firing back at Trump about the redistricting. On X last night, Donald Trump, you see all the caps, right? Do you notice the style? You see what's going on here, right? Donald Trump, the lowest polling president in recent history. This is your second to last warning. The next one is the last one. Stand down now or California will counterstrike legally to destroy your illegal crooked maps in red states. Press conference coming, hosted by America's favorite governor, Gavin Newsom. Final warning next. You won't like it. Thank you for your attention.
Más allá del contenido, el hecho de que un presentador de un canal habitualmente favorable a Trump pronunciara estas palabras en directo es un ejemplo de cómo Newsom está utilizando la comunicación estratégica para incomodar a sus adversarios. Esto no solo fortalece el mensaje entre sus simpatizantes, sino que obliga a los medios opositores a difundir parte de la situación, aunque sea involuntaria.
At this exact moment are dozens and dozens of ICE agents. Donald Trump, you think it's coincidental? No. Donald Trump and his minions, Tom Homan,
tough guy. Crowley decided, coincidentally or not, that this was a location to advance ICE arrests. Indiscriminate? Perhaps. We'll find out later. It was certainly indiscriminate when a 15-year-old disabled boy had a gun put to his head in Los Angeles trying to go to school just a few days ago. I met with it. I don't need to belabor this, except I want to level set. People are scared. People are fearful. You had a United States Senator that was thrown down to the ground in a federal building. Alex Padilla. J.D. Vance's name is Alex Padilla, not Jose Padilla. That's the Vice President of the United States. It's another museum not so far away from us. Talks about those 53 days. Some of you know what I'm referring to. Wake up, America. This is a serious moment. Wake up to what's going on. Wake up to the fear, the anxiety. Wake up to what's happening, not just here in Los Angeles, where we saw our streets militarized. We saw our due process rights thrown out the window.
Lo que estamos viendo no es solo una batalla por distritos electorales, sino por el rumbo que tomará el sistema democrático en Estados Unidos en la próxima década. La pregunta es si otros líderes demócratas estarán dispuestos a seguir el mismo camino o si California quedará como un caso aislado en esta estrategia de confrontación directa. Pero cuéntanos, ¿creen que más estados deberían adoptar medidas como las de California para frenar los cambios en los mapas electorales? ¿Hasta qué punto es legítimo responder con la misma agresividad política porque se denuncia? Si te ha gustado este video, no olvides darle like, suscribirte y comentar. Nos ayuda bastante. Esto ayuda a que más personas conozcan este tipo de análisis. Esto es Rumor de Estado. La llamada cumbre de paz entre Donald Trump y Vladimir Putin no solo dejó dudas sobre la credibilidad de Trump en la política, también sirvió como una cortina de humo. Mientras los titulares se centraban en su encuentro con el presidente ruso, el verdadero problema que persigue al presidente volvió a resurgir. Su relación con Jeffrey Epstein y los intentos de su administración por ocultar esa conexión. Paso a clip. Un recordatorio rápido, si te está gustando el video no olvides darle a like, suscribirte y comentar que nos ayuda mucho. Dicho esto, pasamos.
An agreement with Epstein, and it is the victims now, the survivors, whose interests and whose desires have got to be put first. They want to see the truth and the whole truth about the entire conspiracy come out, and they've got to be heard. But what we have is the Trump Justice Department organizing itself not around the interests of the survivors, the people who were victimized by Maxwell and Epstein, but rather organizing itself around protecting the perpetrators, despite everything they said during the campaign. I mean, they didn't promise, Ali, to throw 17 million people off of their Medicaid health care. They didn't promise to dismantle funding for anti-human trafficking in the State Department, in the Department of Justice, and throughout the government. But they did.
Promised
but
this.
The one thing they did promise was to release this file.
Las palabras del congresista Jamie Raskin ponen en evidencia lo que ha sido un constante. Donald Trump nunca buscó justicia ni verdad en torno a Epstein. Lo que buscó fue controlar la situación, presentarse como ajeno a los crímenes y al mismo tiempo utilizar el dolor de las víctimas como herramienta política. El propio Trump admitió en el pasado que su ruptura con Epstein no fue por razones morales, sino porque consideraba que era una amenaza en el terreno de los negocios. Esa admisión revela el trasfondo real. Un presidente preocupado por su imagen y su riqueza, no por la justicia.
Remember this, Obama cheated on the election. And we have it cold, hard, blue, and it's getting even more so because the stuff that's coming in is not even believable. So, and you should mention that every time they give you a question that's not appropriate, just say, oh, by the way, Obama cheated on the election. You'll watch the camera turn off instantly.
El recurso de culpar a Barack Obama ha sido un patrón en la situación de Trump. Sin pruebas, insiste en asociar al expresidente con escándalos o delitos, incluso mismo vinculándolo con Epstein. Pero esa estrategia, en lugar de desviar la atención, terminó por exponerlo mucho más. Una publicación viral en redes, surgida de teorías conspirativas de sus seguidores, volvió a colocar el tema de Epstein en el centro del debate, y con ello los cuestionamientos a Trump y su entorno regresaron con más fuerza.
Complacent over the years. We assumed that things would continue to get better, that our democracy would become more inclusive, that it would become more fair, that we'd make it easier for people to vote rather than harder for people to vote, that the votes would be counted rather than suppressed. And what we forgot is that history doesn't always move in a straight line, and it's not always 2 steps forward and another 2 steps forward. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward and a step back. And we're in a moment right now where not just gerrymandering, but efforts at voter suppression, efforts at questioning the results of election.
La reacción de cuentas afines a Trump fue predecible. Señalar símbolos en la decoración de Obama como supuestas pruebas de delitos inexistentes. Esta problemática refleja la desconexión con la realidad. Cualquier objeto se convierte en evidencia. Mientras se ignoran los documentos vinculados de Trump con Epstein, en redes sociales lo que buscaba ser una distracción terminó reavivando la conversación sobre los archivos no publicados del caso Epstein y las múltiples fotografías que muestran la cercanía de Trump con él. El episodio más revelador es la denuncia sobre Ghislaine Maxwell. Según Raskin, la administración de Trump facilitó su traslado a una prisión de condiciones privilegiadas, apenas 3 años de haber sido condenada por abusar de menores. Este movimiento, combinado con reuniones privadas entre funcionarios del Departamento de Justicia y Maxwell, despierta sospechas claras de encubrimiento y manipulación de testigo. La sombra de Trump en este proceso es innegable. Y la percepción pública de lo que lo confirma es más del 70% de los estadounidenses que cree que él sabía sobre los crímenes de Epstein antes de que estallara su escándalo.
Letter co-signed by Democratic members of the House Judiciary Committee to Donald Trump's Attorney General and to Donald Trump's Director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons about their decision to transfer Donald Trump's old friend, Ghislaine Maxwell, to what has been called one of the best jails in America to serve time. Congressman Raskin's letter suggests that the prison transfer was done, quote, to shield the president. Congressman Raskin's letter says, 2 weeks ago, you inexplicably transferred Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirator, from a federal correctional institution to a far preferable and relatively luxurious minimum security prison camp in Texas just 3 years into her 20-year sentence for sexually exploiting and abusing minor girls as young as 14. The transfer follows Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche's private interviews of Ms. Maxwell, arranged after a firestorm of media attention about the Department of Justice's refusal to release the full Epstein files as originally demanded by President Donald Trump. These actions raise substantial concerns that the administration may now be attempting to tamper with a crucial witness, conceal President Trump's relationship with convicted sex offenders, and coax Ms. Maxwell into providing false or misleading testimony in order to protect the president. The Trump administration has engaged in a series of actions that create the strong appearance that it is attempting to cover up the full extent of the relationship between President Trump and Mr. Epstein. 71% of Americans think Donald Trump knew some or a lot about the sex crimes committed by Jeffrey Epstein against children before the investigation. Trump's first administration, federal prosecutors charged Ms. Maxwell with perjury, stating her willingness to brazenly lie under oath about her conduct strongly suggests her true motive has been and remains to avoid being held accountable for her crimes. The letter says this about Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, whose last job was Donald Trump's personal criminal defense lawyer. Quote, his actions raise staggering concerns about political conflicts of interest, witness tampering, and suborning of false testimony. And so it has come to this in America. The top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, well-versed in the law, a former law professor himself, suggests the possibility that Donald Trump's Deputy Attorney General, his former criminal defense lawyer, may have committed the federal crimes of, quote, witness tampering and suborning of false testimony. Congressman Raskin's letter says, Less than a week after Mr. Blanche's meeting with Ms. Maxwell, Bureau of Prisons transferred her from a federal correctional institution in Tallahassee, Florida, to an all-woman minimum security prison camp in Bryan, Texas, which is listed as one of the best jails in America to serve time. The women incarcerated there, a population which includes a number of white-collar and celebrity inmates, reportedly enjoy a ton of freedom to interact with one another and have access to educational and social programs unavailable at higher security federal correctional institutions.
Lo ocurrido con Epstein, Maxwell y la administración de Trump no es un tema cerrado. Al contrario, cada intento de desviar la atención parece reavivar el interés público. Y mientras Trump insiste en culpar a otros, las preguntas sobre su rol siguen creciendo. Pero cuéntanos, ¿qué opinan ustedes? ¿Consideran que la administración de Trump intentó encubrir sus vínculos con Epstein? ¿Creen que este escándalo volverá a ocupar un lugar central en la campaña presidencial? No olviden suscribirse, darle a like y compartir este análisis si les ha gustado mucho. Esto es Rumor de Estado. La conferencia de prensa entre Donald Trump y Vladimir Putin en Alaska ha generado más dudas que certezas. Lejos de proyectar liderazgo o firmeza, la aparición pública de Trump junto al presidente ruso fue recibida como un fracaso, incluso por medios que habitualmente le respaldan. La imagen que quedó no fue la de un estadista negociando en nombre de Estados Unidos, sino la de un presidente en busca de la legitimidad internacional dispuesto a ceder protagonismo a Putin en un escenario de alta tensión geopolítica. Un aviso rápido, si te está gustando el video, no olvides suscribirte, darle a like, comentar y compartir el video, que nos ayuda demasiado. Sin más que decir, pasamos a video.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. That was very profound, and I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They're going to have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here, Scott and John Ratcliffe. Thank you very much. But we have some of our really great leaders. They've been doing a phenomenal job. We also have some tremendous Russian business representatives here, and I think everybody wants to deal with us. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world in a very short period of time, and we look forward to that. We look forward to dealing.
La intervención de Trump estuvo marcada por ambigüedad y contradicciones. Mientras insistía en que la reunión había sido productiva, reconocía al mismo tiempo que no había resultados concretos. Esta falta de claridad resulta significativa. En un momento en que la política exterior de Estados Unidos requiere precisión y consistencia, el mensaje transmitido fue de improvisación. Además, el agradecer a Putin y referirse a él con familiaridad, Trump, la verdad, proyectó una cercanía que contrasta con la postura oficial de Washington hacia el Kremlin, especialmente en el contexto de la guerra de Ucrania.
Try and get this over with. We really made some great progress today. I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin, with Vladimir. We had many tough meetings, good meetings. We were interfered with by the Russia hoax. That made it a little bit tougher to deal with, but he understood it. I think he's probably seen things like that during the course of his career. He's seen it all, but we had to put up with the Russia hoax. He knew it was a hoax, and I knew it was a hoax, but what was done was very criminal. But it made it harder for us to deal as a country in terms of the business and all of the things that we'd like to have dealt with, but we'll have a good chance when this is over. So just to put it very quickly, I'm going to start making a few phone calls and tell them what happened, but we had an extremely productive meeting, and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. I would like to thank President Putin and his entire team, whose faces, who I know in many cases, other than that, whose faces I get to see all the time in the newspapers. You're almost as famous as the boss, but especially this one right over here. But we had some good meetings over the years, right? Good productive meetings over the years, and we hope to have that in the future. But let's do the most productive one right now. We're going to stop really 5, 6, 7,000, thousands of people a week from being killed, and President Putin wants to see that as much as I do. So, again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon.
En el énfasis de Trump en abrir viejas polémicas sobre la investigación de injerencia rusa en las elecciones de 2016 es revelador. En lugar de centrarse en la situación actual, el conflicto en Ucrania, las sanciones económicas o la seguridad energética, utilizó la conferencia para insistir en situaciones que buscan reivindicar su propia figura. Con ello, desvió la atención de los asuntos de fondo y reforzó la percepción de que su interés principal no es la política exterior, sino su legado personal y político interno.
Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Esa declaración, aparentemente improvisada, tuvo un efecto inmediato. Reforzó la impresión de que Trump estaría dispuesto a normalizar su relación con Rusia en términos que podrían debilitar la posición de Estados Unidos en el escenario internacional. En política, los gestos importan tanto como los acuerdos, y el hecho de insinuar una visita oficial a Moscú sin consultar a los aliados de la OTAN abre un flanco de vulnerabilidad de cohesión occidental frente a Putin. La conferencia en Alaska dejó más interrogantes que conclusiones. Para algunos fue una demostración de debilidad estratégica. Para otros, un intento calculado de reposicionar a Trump como una figura internacional. Pero lo que queda claro es que este encuentro, lejos de fortalecer a Estados Unidos, ha puesto en evidencia las tensiones internas de su política exterior y ambivalencia de un liderazgo que sigue priorizando intereses personales sobre compromisos globales. Pero cuéntame tú qué crees. ¿Qué mensaje creen que envió Trump a sus aliados de la OTAN con esta conferencia? ¿Consideran que su cercanía con Putin puede tener consecuencias en la política interna de Estados Unidos? Si te gustó el video y has llegado hasta aquí, no olvides suscribirte, darle a like y compartir este análisis para que más personas comprendan lo que realmente está en el juego de la política estadounidense. Esto es Rumor de Estado.